You know Sonic, you know the speed, the attitude, the legacy, but do you remember the moment he ditched the shoes, stepped onto a hoverboard and tried to reinvent the very idea of what a Sonic racer could be? Before Sonic was ever seated in cars alongside Sega's mascots, before Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing carved out his reputation as Sega's definitive Mario Kart competitor, there was Sonic Riders, a spin-off that refused to imitate. Instead of party chaos and rubber band items, it traded in adrenaline, depth, and style. It asked players to budget their speed, manage resources with an air meter, surf the turbulence of rivals, and choose their routes as if they were running through a Sonic platformer at 300 kilometers an hour. And yet, despite its ambition, when people talk about Sonic spin-offs, Riders almost never shows up. There are no remasters, no big anniversary notes, no nostalgic re-releases to preserve its place in the franchise. It lingers only in memory. I'm Arcadenaut here, and with Sonic Racing Crossworlds now on the horizon, it feels like the perfect time to look back at Sonic Riders and ask, why did it vanish from the conversation? What was it trying to do, and what lessons can it still teach about Sonic's future in racing? The year was 2006 and Sonic Team was experimenting everywhere. After the tonal shift of Shadow the Hedgehog, the polarizing reception of Sonic Heroes, and on the cusp of the disaster that would be Sonic 06. The Blue Hedgehog was in flux. In the middle of that chaos came a racing game that wasn't a kart racer. Sonic Riders arrived not as a clone of Nintendo's Mario Kart, but as Sega's Counterpunch, a game built on style, speed, and the identity of Sonic as more than just a mascot who runs. Riders gave Sonic and his rivals hoverboards called Extreme Gear, and transformed the racetracks into something closer to Jet Set Radio colliding with futuristic chaos. From the very first moments, Sonic Riders makes its intentions clear. The menus are sharp and angular, the UI drenched in luminous neons that scream early 2000s futurism, the soundtrack pumps with drum and bass, breakbeats and techno rhythms, the kind of music you would hear blasting from Sega arcades in their golden days. It was a game completely soaked in the aesthetics of its era. Booting it up feels like flipping through a 2000s magazine spread about extreme sports culture, graffiti fonts, edgy mascots, and a sense of style that doesn't just support the gameplay, but defines it. The opening cutscene sets the stage. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles encounter a new rival crew, the Babylon Rogues. At the front is Jet the Hawk, brash, arrogant, and absolutely convinced that he, not Sonic, is the fastest in the world. Behind him is Wave the Swallow, the crew's sharp-tongued engineer who builds and tunes the Rogue's gear while constantly mocking anyone, especially Tails, who doesn't meet her high standards. Then there is Storm the Albatross, the muscle, loyal, powerful but simple-minded. Together, these three cut through the air as if to announce the arrival of a new era. And as always, Dr. Eggman is waiting in the wings. He seizes the opportunity and announces the EX World Grand Prix, a global hoverboard tournament broadcast like a futuristic extreme sports championship. The prize is glory and treasure. The hook is deeper. The Rogues' ancient lineage tied to the legendary Babylonians and their fabled floating city. For Jet and his crew, this Grand Prix is more than just a race. It's a chance to reclaim their heritage, to prove themselves as heirs to a forgotten legacy. For Sonic and his team, it is a challenge to their very identity. Who really holds the title of the fastest thing alive when the battlefield shifts from land to air? That is the backbone of Riders' story, a sports narrative laced with Sonic's classic rivalries and just enough myth to give the tournament stakes beyond the trophy. It may not be as captivating as mainline Sonic plot, but it kinda works because it reframes speed as culture. What truly gave the game its edge was its roster and how it connected directly to the course design. Riders introduced class-based gameplay, dividing characters into speed, flight and power types. Sonic could grind rails that opened routes others couldn't access. Tails could soar through airborne ring paths that carved shortcuts above the track, and Knuckles could smash obstacles, breaking open new lanes. Meanwhile, the Rogues mirrored these traits, Jet as a speed rival to Sonic, Wave as the flight specialist to counter Tails, and Storm as the power brute against Knuckles. Eggman himself also joins the roster, riding his own bizarre gadgets, and beyond the core cast, the game offered unlockable characters like Shadow, Rouge, Cream, and even Supersonic. And these weren't just fan service inclusions, as each one reshaped how you approach the course. Pick Sonic and you are locked into rail dominance strategies, or choose Wave and you are committing to aerial navigation. Play Storm and the track becomes about brute force. Basically, in Riders, characters wasn't just about aesthetic, it was way of carving the map. All of this was held together by the mechanics, and Riders was never shy about punishing anyone who couldn't keep up. At its core was the air meter, a constantly draining resource that powered everything, from boosting, drifting, and even keeping you airborne. Manage it poorly and you would burn out mid-race, reduce the sprinting helplessly on foot while your rivals blew past. You would have to dive into pit stops, losing precious seconds just to stay competitive. The design demanded decision making. Boost too early and you would crash later, hoard too much and you would never reach your true potential. Every lap became a test of resource management as much as reflexes. And then there was Turbulence. Riders created glowing slipstreams behind races, and these could be surfed like highways. Locked into one and suddenly you were pulled forward, slingshotting past rivals, sometimes launching into massive jumps that skipped nearly half the track. It is the comeback system that gave you hope even when you fell behind, but it was also chaotic. Sometimes Turbulence carried you to victory, other times it could also fling you into disaster. Sonic Riders was so unique and ambitious that it came also at a cost. It was also quite punishing. Definitely not an ordinary kart racing experience where anyone could pick up a controller and feel at home. Let's say even if you'd grown up on Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing, Riders felt different. Run out of air once and you would spend maybe half a lap running hopelessly on foot. Miss a turbulence chain and recovery was almost impossible. Sonic Riders demanded you to learn its systems on its own terms, and for many, that learning curve was too tricky. Especially with Sonic Riders lacking proper tutorials to teach the fundamentals. As Sonic Riders crafted an unique route to itself with these elements, Zero Gravity on the other hand, as its sequel, felt more of a easier version to this experience. 2 years later, Sega returned with a sequel called Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. If the first Riders was a rager's edge of style and punishment, Zero Gravity was a noticeable shift in tone. Sonic Team knew the criticisms and it seemed their answer was to smooth down the spikes. The relentless air meter system that defined every second of the original was gone. And this is the main reason why Zero Gravity feels more like an ordinary racing game. In its place came something more forgiving, something kind of feels more cinematic, but depending on who you ask, the manipulation of gravity feels less distinctive in my opinion. From the moment you launch into your first race, it is clear the sequel wants to feel more accessible. Instead of budgeting every boost like precious currency, the new mechanics encourage you to bend the rules of physics in an easier, more accessible way. The key system was gravity control. Although it may sound interesting, the use of this mechanic is way simpler. Tap into it, and the world itself tilts around you. With the gravity dive, you either slam forward in a burst of momentum, plowing through obstacles in a straight line, or do a sharp turn while racing at high speed during curves. While the camera dramatizes your every move as it conveys the sense of being the center of a gravity field, the experience may seem more flashy, but also losing that 2000s graffiti and jet set radio-like tone while being easier to grasp and more welcoming. On paper, it sounds like an upgrade, trading meters and pit stops for stunts and more spectacle, but what Zero Gravity gained in accessibility, it unfortunately sacrificed in identity. The air system of the first riders gave every decision a weight. Boosting too early could kill your final lap. Resource management was the hidden battle beneath every race, but without that system, Zero Gravity also lost its tension. Gravity dives may seem interesting, but lacking the depth. Turbulence in the first game felt wild and chaotic, sometimes saving you, sometimes betraying you. The new systems turned the sequel into a smoother ride, one with fewer moments of desperation and triumph. The story follows a similar rhythm of rivalry and myth, but with a slightly different focus. This time, the plot centers around the discovery of ancient technology, objects tied once again to the Babylonian heritage that defined the first riders. Instead of just racing for treasure, the Babylon Rogues and Team Sonic are drawn into a mystery of artifacts that can manipulate gravity itself. Dr. Eggman sees an opportunity for conquest, using the tournament and its relics for his own schemes. On the surface, it is still an excuse for Sonic and Jet to collide once more, but the sequel leans harder into sci-fi angle, giving the narrative a colder, almost mechanical atmosphere compared to the extreme sports energy of the original. The Babylon Rogues return as rivals, but their edge feels slightly dulled by the shift in mechanics. Jet is still the self-proclaimed Speed King, Wave continues to outthink her opponents with engineering, and Storm remains as the muscle. Yet, because the system doesn't lock you into a class route as tightly as before, their identities sometimes blur. The classes are still there, speed, flight, power, but the dominance of the gravity mechanics and as well as the gears you unlock by collecting rings kinda overshadow them. Another system that defined Zero Gravity was the way you unlock and customize your extreme gear. Instead of relying only on character choice, players could also purchase new boards, bikes and gear by collecting rings throughout the game. Just like in the first Sonic Riders, these rings acted as currency. Some gear pieces even shifted classes, meaning you could reframe a character's role entirely with the right purchase, and on paper, this added depth. But in practice, it often distracted from the sense of racing. However, what Zero Gravity did deliver more confidently was in its track design. Where the original riders sometimes felt like courses were designed around punishing the resource management, the sequel's maps opened themselves up to flow. Stages like Aquatic Capital had wide and cinematic lanes that curve into sweeping turns, perfect for this new futuristic aesthetics of Zero Gravity. Nearly all of the tracks carried Sega's late 2000s visual polish, as the soundtrack pulls back from the raw drum and bass energy and also added kind of a mix of electronic. Maybe this could be seen as a safer Sonic identity, especially after the criticisms that Sonic Riders received. And yet, despite all of this polish, Zero Gravity didn't leave the same mark. Where the first Riders divided its audience by being punishing but unforgettable and being stylish but chaotic, its sequel felt more digestible, but also more disposable, so to say. Players who didn't experience the original often preferred Zero Gravity, but those who loved Riders for its uniqueness found themselves unmoved. Instead of building on what made the first game stand out, Zero Gravity traded identity for accessibility, and in doing so, it softened the rivalry at the heart of the series. Neither Riders nor Zero Gravity went on to define Sonic's racing future. Within just a couple of years, Sega would pivot towards Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing and a more traditional kart racer that embraced accessibility and crossover spectacle. It was fun, it was approachable, and quickly eclipsed Riders in popularity, leaving the hoverboard experiment stranded. Riders became one of those games fans remembered fondly if they clicked with it, but otherwise it vanished into obscurity. Still, there is something worth remembering and honoring here. Riders represented a moment when Sonic Team wasn't afraid to gamble, when they tried to merge the series' platforming DNA with the energy of extreme sports and arcade futurism. It wasn't perfect, but it was ambitious, and in its own way, it anticipated the modern appetite for high-skill races. With Sonic Racing Crossworlds on the horizon, maybe Sonic Riders' legacy should live on and continue with Sonic Racing. All of these turbulence mechanics, air meters should be a game mode within Crossworlds. Since Sonic Riders turned into a cult favorite, a hidden gem that still lives on as a retro classic, definitely deserves a chance in modern scene as well. And thank you for watching today's video. Have you played Sonic Riders before? Would you like to see its system added to Sonic Racing Crossworlds as an alternate game mode? Any humble support through Patreon and YouTube join is really appreciated, and I will see you soon by my next video.